Hey guys, this is Mitch with FinePoint CGI, and today we're going to get a status update on some of the new features with Godot 4. So we're going to talk about the new editor, sun and environment settings menu that has been added. We're going to talk about how baking Lightmaps now work. So that's exciting. We are going to talk about the importer settings menu. I don't think I've ever actually covered it yet, but it's not quite a new feature, but it's something that's been added. And we're going to talk about Blender controls that just got added to Blender. So the ability to grab, rotate, and scale. And the view changing system that Blender has with the numpad has been added. So that's really exciting. And the last thing that we're going to talk about is possibly the coolest feature of all of them, and that is SSIL, or screen space indirect lighting, which will allow us to have a more realistic scene when we're playing our game. So that's what I have in store for you guys today. So let's go ahead and get started. Okay, so the first thing that we're going to talk about is one of the coolest new features since I've last looked at Godot 4. And that is up here, tucked underneath these three little dots here, is a sun and environment settings area. You can actually come in and adjust. So if you see what my lighting looks like here, if I click on this and I move this over, you'll see that it starts affecting my sun and my lighting. So it allows me to come in and adjust what my world's going to look like. If I just kind of drag this and I just adjust my azimuth like that maybe, and I pull this down, you'll see that I can get some really cool ways to switch my lighting up real quick. I can say I want my light to be over here now, and there we go. Or I can change like my sun color. So if I want to come in here and make it more like a sunset-y color, maybe change my sky color to a sunset as well. So it's super useful if you want to just kind of change your scene on the fly. You can just come in and really quickly change your scene. Now, you can also come in here and add in post-processing effects. So you can say, oh, I'd like to have my tone map. So you can shut off your tone map. If I close this, you can see how my tone has changed. If I turn on tone map, you'll see that it's now tone mapped it differently. If I click on this and I click on like GI, for instance, you'll see it suddenly gives me GI. It's a little on the finickier side, I'm not going to lie, because I don't get access to all those fancy settings that I normally would get access to by having an environment node, but it's nice to have. You know, I can come in here and click and say I would like some AO maybe just while I'm working around my scene. And one of the coolest things is if I click on this, I can click add environment to scene or add sun to scene. If I click add sun to scene, it will automatically drop in a directional light in the position that you would expect. So it actually drops in a small directional light right here that has your settings. So you can come in here and you can rotate it and it'll match what you have, but it literally is what your sun settings were. So you can see that you have all of your lights, it has the correct color and indirect energy and shadow settings and things like that, all already done for us. So that's really cool. If we do the same thing, we can click on our environment node as well, and you will see that when we click over there, you can come into our environment and you can see that it already turned on AO. It turned on well, I actually shut it off. So if I turn it back on, it would have already turned it on, and I could actually turn on like, you know, read skylight to help with the over darkening that's going on. But that's kind of one of the cool new features is this little menu. Now you'll notice that once we have a scene that contains a directional light and a scene that contains a world preview, you'll notice that that section has been disabled. So if I come in here and I delete my directional light, and then I come in here, you'll see that I once again regain that control. So that's something to keep in mind if you want this menu available to you. Don't have a directional light in your scene and you'll be able to have the sun lamp. Same thing with the world environment. If you guys don't, if you guys have an environment node, it's going to disable this little box here. So that's something to keep in mind. Now, the next major thing that I wanted to highlight was the ability to bake your light maps. So I have added in a lightmap GI node, and I've already ran through the bake, but I will go ahead and show you guys what it looks like. So if I click on this and let it show, you guys can see how it looks. Now you'll see that there are quite a few small issues, things like this, little tiny blotches. And I'm sure with some finagling, you guys could probably get it to look pretty nice, but these are my settings. So I have it on ultra with 3 bounces, and I am using the denoiser, and I'm setting it as an interior. I don't have to. If I set it as not interior, I'm curious what that's going to do. Not too much different, but it does allow you to set your scene, so you can actually set a different environment when you're baking. So if you want to set like a custom sky, you can. So that's really cool and very impressive. I mean, the light map that it pumps out is actually quite good. It's for the most part, it's pretty solid. So much like before, it's a very powerful little light mapping system. I know there are probably some changes that are going to be going into this before release, but right now this is the current state of it, and it looks pretty good in my opinion. Now, the next other big feature that we're going to highlight is the new importer settings tool. So if you kind of bring this up, you can see that it allows you to do all sorts of really cool stuff. So if I click on here, you can see that I have these actions, so I can extract my materials, I can save my animation paths, I can save or set my animation path, my mesh save paths. Now, one thing that I would suggest that I've noticed is if you update this, sometimes it can get kind of finicky when Godot is doing its importing. Sometimes mesh just disappears and things like that. I know that there are some bug tickets out there for it, but that's the current state of it. Now, one of the cool things is that you can actually see your mesh while you're, checking it out. So you can actually, rotate around it and zoom in. Now, in my case, you're not going to see much because it's a 4-walled room, but you can actually see the individual objects. So you can click on it and then look at it and see what it is. So you can see like this is like a pillow, this is like the windows, this is a icosphere for some of the trash, and you can actually come in here and really look at each one of your individual objects, and you can have settings over here on the right. And these settings over here on the right are super useful. So you have save to file, which allows you to save your object to a file. So if this is enabled, what it's going to do is it's going to dump it out to a path. It'll actually dump it out as a scene specifically for you. Hey, Editor Mitch here. So that's not completely correct. If you do a save to file and you pick your path and you call it like wardrobe, right, and hit save, when you do your export, what you're going to be doing is basically it's going to export it out as an RES file. So it's not an actual scene file, it's a mesh file. So that's just something to keep in mind. You can't just directly drag that into your scene, I don't believe, and have it be happy. So you'll need to go ahead and add an child node, add in a mesh instance, and then you can drag in your RES file there, and then you would have your object instanced into the scene. So that's just something to keep in mind, that it's not actually making a scene, it's just creating a resource file. So yeah, back to the video. You have make streamable, which is really cool because it allows you to actually make your asset streamable, so it can stream from your hard drive into memory, which it makes it way more efficient and better for most games in terms of performance and things like that. Shadow meshes, you can set if it's going to have a shadow mesh. Lightmap UVs, you can tell it to bake or enable its lightmap UVs. LODs, if it actually has an LOD or not. So we've covered this in the past, but you now have these two normal, split, and merge angles to help make your LODs not as bad as they were. So a lot of times when you're dealing with objects that are far away, sometimes automatic LOD generation, a lot of times you deal with things just collapsing in on themselves and stuff like that. Whereas with this, it just kind of handles it for you, and you can just kind of make these few adjustments here and make it look better. Now, something that would be nice is being able to load in your own LODs, or maybe looking at your UV2s, right? Or your UVs in general. It would be nice to be able to take a look at them. But for the most part, this is a really nice little system here. Now, if we click on meshes, you can see that we just have our specific meshes with their materials underneath them. So we can actually look at our materials, and we can say use external and actually pass in a material if we want to override this specific material. And we can look at all of the materials that we have here, what they look like. If we go over to materials, you'll see all the materials that this object has. And like I said, if you click on actions, you can actually extract your materials. And let's just create a folder and call it materials. And then I can click select current folder. And then when I click report, what it's going to do is it's going to extract all those materials, or it's going to crash Godot. In this case, it crashed Godot. So I'm going to reopen Godot. Okay, so now that we're back inside of Godot, I'm going to go ahead and reopen up that low poly bedroom. And basically, normally, if it didn't crash Godot, you could just extract your materials and hit re-import. And what it's going to do is it's going to extract all those materials. But it crashed Godot a second time, so I don't think it's going to work. So I'm just going to go ahead and stick with what we have, and we can go from there. All right, so now that we're back inside of Godot after our second crash, one of the other big features that I wanted to highlight is the ability to do Blender-like controls inside of Godot. So one of the big struggles that I have personally is with moving objects in Godot. So if I come up to this object here, you can see that I have to kind of grab these little gimbals and move them around to move my object. Now, what you can do is you can go up to your editor, go to your editor settings, and then underneath shortcuts, they have an entire section here where you can edit your own Godot shortcuts, right? Well, one of the things that they added was the ability to do Blender-like transforms inside of Godot. And if I remember correctly, if we type begin, you will see that we have all of these settings right here. And those settings are our Blender-like settings. So we can actually come in here and set it to something like, if we want rotate to be R, like we would expect, we could click on here and hit R. Or if you want to, you could do what Godot's one is, which I believe is E. And then you could do scale, which I believe is R, and I believe translate is W. Right? Now, you don't have to do this one, but these are the ones that I'm just picking, right? And if you hit close and you hit W, you start grabbing onto it. Because I assigned it to W, by the way. Again, you can set it to whatever you want. If you hit W and then you hit X, you'll notice that you constrain it on the X axis. If you hit Y, you constrain it on the Y axis. And if you hit Z, you constrain it on the Z axis. And if you double tap Z, so if I hit Z and then Z again, it's on the local axes. If I hit Y and Y, it's on the local Y axes. And same thing with X and X, it's on the local X axis. So this gives you a lot of flexibility when you're moving objects around. Now you got to be careful because it gets a little finicky. And now I'm trying to do Blender controls because I'm so used to it. And it's just a touch bit finicky. There we go. So you can just kind of hit W and kind of move it around. And like I said, it's a touch on the finicky side, but it gives you a lot of that freedom. Whoa. I think it's still caught to me. There we go. Let me focus in on this. Hey, Editor Mitch here again. Something that I neglected to mention is that if you grab it and you hit Shift Z, it'll constrain it on your X and Y axis. If you hit Shift Y, it'll constrain it on your Z axes, or on your X and Z axes. So the Y is not being used. And if you do it on the X axis, it does the same thing, but it constrains it on the Y and Z axes. So that's something to keep in mind. It's super useful if you wanted to translate an object. Let's say You know, if I wanted to move this object and I wanted to just have it do it, you know, I wanted to move it forward and over a tiny bit, I can just hit G, Shift Y, and that isolates my Y axis and says, I don't want to move it on this axis. So if you hit Shift, it basically says, I don't want to use that axis. Anyway, back to the video. And you can also do stuff like, in my case, it's E, but you could set it to whatever you want. But I set it to E. So E and then X, Y, and Z. And same thing for scale. So if I go R, it also allows you to scale as you would expect. So you'll notice if I zoom out and then I hit Control and I grab this object. So if I hit your grab key and then you hit Control, you can translate this object and then let's say X. And then hit Control, and you'll see that we snap it to our different respective units. So you can see I go up one, I go down one. If I do it on the, let's see if I do it on the Z axis, that might be easier. So you can see how it snaps from one unit to the next. And if you hit Shift Control, you'll see that you snap it on each 0.1 increment. So that's really useful and super nice. Now, the only thing that I think is slightly missing from here is being able to fine tune your movement, but that's very reasonable for the amount of flexibility that we gain with this new set of hotkeys here. But it's a really cool way to make it so that as you're working, you can just kind of place something, maybe rotate it a tiny bit. So let me rotate it a little bit like this. Maybe rotate it back a tiny bit. You know, so it gives you that quick feedback that you would expect from Blender inside of Godot. So it's a huge feature, in my opinion. And like I said, eventually I'm sure Control to snap and Shift to do like small incremental changes will come eventually. I know there was some discussion of it. Now, the other cool thing that has come in is from Blender is the 13579 numpad buttons here. So if I hit 1 on my keypad, you'll see that we get snapped to our front view. If we hit 3, we get snapped to our right view. If we hit 7, we're on top. And if we hit 9, we are on bottom. So that's some of the cool stuff. So we can say, you know, 1, 3, 7, 9, right? And we can also do 4, which will let us rotate like this. We can hit 6, which will let us rotate like this. We can hit 8, which will let us rotate up and down. 8 and 2 does that. So you get a lot of really nice little features in this sense. And if we hit 5, it'll change our orthographic view or perspective view. So 1 looks almost like a drawing, and the other one looks like it has 3-dimensional space. So that's a really cool feature for those of us who like Blender, and it gives us a lot of additional ways to interact with Godot. Now, the last thing that we're going to talk about is SSIL. And SSIL stands for Screen Space Indirect Lighting. It's a type of indirect lighting that allows you to bounce diffuse lighting between objects. So basically what it does is it takes your screen and it basically takes lighting and kind of bounces it around the scene using your screen as a reference. And it really helps with making everything feel a little bit more volumetric and a little bit nicer, if that makes sense. Unity uses it during their high definition render pipeline. So it's something that generally makes your scene look a little bit nicer and maybe a little softer, and can help with making things feel better, if that makes sense. Now, I've had problems with in the past getting it to work, so let's see if it's going to go ahead and run for us. So I will click enable on it, and you'll see that it looks like it doesn't work on my 1070, so I might need to jump onto my laptop to kind of show you guys how it works, because it looks like it's a little broken. on my computer, which is really unfortunate. I was hoping it would actually take it this time, but it doesn't look like it's going to like it. So I'll be right back. I'll jump on my computer and we can talk about this. Okay, so now that I am on my laptop, let's come down here and enable SSIL. And if I turn it on, you'll notice that suddenly everything gets a little bit nicer. You have some lighting reflecting off here. You got some lighting reflecting back here, some lighting reflecting back here. You'll notice that you get some of that global illumination stuff going on up here, which is really nice. And it really helps make your scene look good. You'll also notice that if I zoom in, which I'm using my mouse pad, so I'm sorry, but if I zoom in, you'll notice that that lighting does move. So that's something to keep in mind. You can see up here that lighting kind of moves as you go back and forward. So that might be annoying to your user, and that's something that you might want to keep in mind. But it's really, really nice because it makes your scene just look better. I mean, you can see here, and if I turn this on, it just adds a lot of that nice global illumination like values here. Now, radius determines how much of it gets spread out among your scene. So you can see if you look right here in this general area, as I pull this back, you'll see it kind of comes closer to the ground here. And as I pull it out, you'll see it kind of move up as it starts blending in to the scene going up like this. Now, if you kind of throw it to an extreme and you just kind of really reef it up, it gets really kind of crazy. You can see how it gets super blurry, but you know, it gives you a lot of flexibility here. Now, if we move over to intensity, that just is how much of that global illumination you want. And some people will probably want to make it crazy, something like this, but some people might want to make it just kind of subtle, which is very useful as well. Now, the default is 1, and the default does a pretty good job. Now, sharpness determines how sharp your corners are when you are calculating this value. So if I bring the intensity all the way up and I kind of lower the sharpness, you'll see kind of what it does. So you can see here in this general area, if I bring this up, you'll see that it kind of helps tighten up that edge right there that normally would get taken away if I didn't have that slider. So it kind of helps stop stuff from blending in with each other, if that makes sense. And normal rejection is the normal that is rejected when it's calculating its sample points. So if you bring this down, you'll notice that it starts rejecting like these little corners and things like that. So if you just kind of pull this back, you'll see how it starts rejecting those corners and starts pulling out some of that global illumination in the corners. So it's just something that's useful in case you want to help, clean up this little area. If you have too much of the dark in the corners, you can just kind of pull that out. So that's pretty much SSIL. It's really cool and super useful, and I think it's going to be a great addition to the post-processing effects that Godot offers. All right, let me go back to my desktop and we can close out this video. So that is all I have for you guys today. So if you like this video, go ahead and hit that like button. Hey, if you dislike this video, go ahead and hit that dislike button because I am here to make content for you guys. This video wasn't a viewer suggested video. However, I do take your guys' suggestions very seriously. So if you have any suggestions, please leave them in the comments below and I'll be more than happy to add it to my Trello board and get to it and create a tutorial on the topic that you're looking for. And hey, if you guys have any questions or any comments or just want to tell me that I don't know what I'm talking about, please throw them in the comments below and I'll be more than happy to have a conversation with you. And I really do want to know what you guys think about Godot 4. Is it a good game engine? Do you guys like where it's headed? I think it's headed in a great direction, and that, the rendering in general is better, and it seems like a pretty decent game engine, and the changes that they're making seems like they're fairly welcome. Some of them need more work than others, but for the most part, it seems like the engine's coming together nicely, if that makes sense. So let me know what you guys think. But that is all I have for you guys today. So thank you so much again for watching, and I will see you all next time. Thanks.